Morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be back here in the middle of this small little crisis worldwide. Um, just before I start, in this worship, I just saw a picture, maybe fits a little bit of what I want to say, and it's almost like God wants to say to people, what you see around you is not always real, or the real thing. And in that, I saw lots of people standing in mud, and they feel stuck. And then, in that, it's like God was saying, it's just feel the mud. It's actually a springboard. It's not to keep you stuck. It's to propel you forward. You know, it's like the Israelites in the desert. They came into a desert, sand and nothing, and then there was a rock. But it wasn't what it seemed to be. It was actually a river. So, see through what you face. Because on the other side, there's life. Inside of it, it's life. A rock is the most... that's not the place where you go and look for water. Yet, there was a river in that rock. It wasn't a glass here and there. It was a river. And sometimes what we face look like impossible, but... it's not what it seems, if it means anything to anybody. I was going to preach a sermon that I prepared, and then sometimes the things change a bit. So I've got more of just an encouragement that happened to me Thursday morning at 2 o'clock. After my flight, I was a bit up and down. So if we can, so my title this morning of just let's call it encouragement, it's time to advance. And I want to read a few verses here in Deuteronomy 1. Just want to check my time. Now the context here was the Israelites, remember now where they came from. They were in a slave situation for 450 years, and they knew nothing but slavery. Never had a holiday, never went to the next town, never had a weekend. It was 7 days and 7 nights a week, or 7 days a week, 450 years of that in a row, with no break. But in that place, everything was, in a sense, known. You knew what you were going to do, and it was all comfortable. And then God said, you know, I've got something different for you. And they went out, and they went around a little bit. And then when they faced the promised land, that was actually in the beginning when they could go in, and then they didn't listen to God, and then they had to walk around for 40 years. But in that time, God said to them this, listen to this, because I think it's very relevant for where individual people are today, and for groups of people, churches, cities, nations, everything. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel in the desert east of the Jordan. I'm not going to say all those funny words. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses proclaimed to the Israelites all that the Lord had commanded him concerning them. Now listen to this, verse 4 is very important, because she touched on it there in the word that she brought. This was after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites. Now the Amorites was a giant nation. They were giants. The Amorites were bigger than our locks today. They were big people. King of the Amorites who reigned in Heshbon, and Edrei had defeated Og, however you say that guy's name, king of Bashan, who reigned in the Ashtaroth. Now Og was only 14 feet high, because that's the size of his bed. It was 14 feet, a bed made of iron, because everything else was going to break under this guy's weight. He was a giant of a man. I mean, these two guys could probably wipe out the Springbok and the All Black and the Wallaby Scrum on their own. They were big, big people. And God had taken Israel in a desert with no training. They were not soldiers. They were just slaves, to fight the two biggest guys around, to show them who he was. You see, friends, God He's taking us, remember your inheritance is is always in an area that seems impossible from the outside. It's never downhill in a Maserati and you arrive there in the shade. It's not that. If you face giants this morning, I want to say to you, you are in God's will. You are on the edge of your inheritance because it's always in the land of giants. That's how a promise comes. So God took Israel, He built a memory for them of what He could do. Remember now what happened in Israel, in Egypt. It was miraculous. They walked out there. God wiped out the biggest and strongest army on the face of the earth without these guys moving a finger. He did it. You know the sea story. And then they marched around and they had food every day. And they faced these two absolute monsters. And they took them out like picnic. Why? Because they're going to need it in the future. So look with joy at your current battles. Because it's not the end. It's just so that you can see God for who He is and what He wants to do. Don't let this disaster in the world, this COVID, don't let this thing discourage you. Many people have lost their jobs. Many people have lost friends and family and spouses and children and grandparents. Many people, all of us know people that have gone through this. It is a disaster. No one asked for that. Last year, this time, no one knew anything was coming. Suddenly it's there. But God's, He will use it for His ways. And so, verse 5, east of the Jordan in the territory of Moab, Moses began to expound this law, saying, now for me it's interesting that he just gives that one example of these two big boys that they took out. And then he says, the Lord our God said to us at Horeb, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Where does He send them to? Not to a Sunday school picnic. He sent them in a land filled with giants. That was their land. And now they had to drive out these people that were 5 foot taller than them. All of them. That's what it says. Go to the neighboring people in the Arabah, into the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev, and along the coast to the land of the Canaanites and in Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. And then He says, see, I have given you this land. Up front. They didn't even know what it looked like, but God said, I have given it to you. Not I'm going to, I have given it to you. So just go in. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them. And friends, we must remember that time is not a big deal for Him. They're facing now the promised land that God promised to them hundreds of years ago, because God's timeless. And like it says later in Joshua 21 and 23, it says, when they had gone into the promised land, they looked back and they realized this incredible thing. It says, not one of the promises of God was not fulfilled. Not one. Not the tiniest one was not fulfilled. Why? Because God cannot lie. He doesn't say something and tomorrow He says, oh, shucks, I didn't think of that. There's going to be this. There's going to be COVID. There's going to be this thing. There's going to be that thing. No. Straight through. Oops. Every word that God has spoken will happen. Every word will happen. It's not going to happen. But we ask sometimes, but why this and why that? But that's not the question to ask. Timing, those things, those are not. They become irrelevant if your eyes are on God. Most of the promises in the Bible never happened like on the next day. We're telling a story here now that has taken centuries to come to this point of just God's dealings and showing us how to move forward in this land. But for us, for myself, for all of us, I think God said it's time to advance. Wherever you are in life, there's new things, there's inheritance, there's futures, there's hopes, there's what God has for us. Remember what Paul prophesies there in Ephesians 2, verse 10. He says, God has prepared works for us in advance to do, so that can be our lives. No one else on the earth is there to do your thing. It's for you, and God chose it for you, so that's the best thing. But today we live in this competition world and all that. It's unnecessary. We should be like a rugby team. You know, in a rugby team you get like the Faf de Klerk-sized boys, and then you get the big people. But you know, they're never jealous of each other because they all wear a Springbok jersey. The one guy has got a size 50 and the other guy 28, but it's still a Springbok jersey. And the same with us. Some of us wear a big jersey, and some of us, but they're all Springbok jerseys. They're Jesus jerseys. So we don't have to, oh, why is that guy bigger than me, or stronger, or richer, or poorer, or whatever? It's not the point. The point is we came from the same block, if we want to put it like that. We're part of God. We're His children. He lives in us all equally. And He's going to do that for us. So at the Jordan, there was a long wait. Because remember where they came from. They came from a place of certainty. First of all, in Egypt, where everything was certain, though it was slavery. They knew every Monday what they're going to do, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They knew what they're going to have food and what they're going to eat on Monday nights and Tuesday nights. All was set for 450 years. In the desert was the same. It was a desert, but they knew every morning they're going to give those little fulkies, and they're going to get water, and they're going to get that funny bread. But they knew. It was all known. It was all certain. It was all that. And then they stopped at the Jordan. And God said to them, you know, when you cross this thing, all that stuff stops. Now you have to trust me. Land flowing with milk and honey. Vineyards that you did not plant. Houses that you did not build. But things, it sounds quite romantic, that. But all of us face that today, because what's going to happen next month? Who can tell me? You know, I flew out of London on Tuesday night. It was fine in London, Tuesday night, when I got on the airplane at, whenever it was, 10 o'clock. The next morning when I landed here and I phoned Gisela, she said, they locked the country last night, 12 o'clock. Goons? Put the key in a safe. That's how quick it happens. So we don't know what's going to happen. We knew of certainty what happened in the past, but we don't know about tomorrow. So the question is where's your eyes? So the promise of God, the gift of God, the inheritance of God comes by listening. That's why you'll hear now what they were facing was just against the odds. It was insurmountable what they faced, these people. Remember, they had no preparation. They didn't know a thing. A completely new place. It was insurmountable odds that they had to go in. It was this broken, small little nation taking on 50 nations as bigger and stronger than them. The Bible says that. It's not me saying that. So they faced something that was impossible to do on their own. It was impossible. So God said, listen and remember. He says, remember what you did to those two big guys. The rest will be the same. The rest will be the same. And so the promise comes by listening, God speaking and us listening, and then it becomes us, it becomes ours when we walk in covenant. It's kept in covenant with God. Now covenant means many things, but the beginning of a covenant is rooted in history. It's always rooted in the past. You know, people say don't dwell on the past, but there's a positive to be in the past as well, because that's where my life is. That's the only memory I have of who God is. And now at the moment, because He's not there anymore, He's only here. When I ask God, what's your name? It says, I am. It's present. But I know what God's done for me. I know He lives. He lives as surely as I stand here. He lives, He speaks to you, but we must listen. He says, remember, remember, remember. Because otherwise you face the giant and you lose courage and you go back to the known. But I just want to encourage you. I remember, I always, walking with God, you hit a year that's just, you just think, man, it can't be tougher next year. But I can only speak for myself. I've never had an easier year than the previous one in my life. Never. It's always tougher. So I know now next year is going to be tougher, strain than this year. I know it. And I'm not a doom prophet. I'm just exciting of what God's going to do. Because in the midst of that, there's a table of feasting. In the midst of the giants, there's a table of feasting. There's an inheritance. The bigger the fight, the bigger the inheritance. When you win the Curry Cup, it's one thing, but when you win the World Cup, it's different. They're still having a party of last year's World Cup. So the context here, friends, I stand at the boundary of the known and the unknown, and we're standing there today. We stand at the boundary of what the past is, and all of us face a future. Some of us are going to have a new job or lose a job or move to another town or get married or this thing or that thing. Everything is, the future is uncertain. There's a boundary, and all you have is a past to get you to move into your future. So what do you do at the boundary? Do you get discouraged? Do you think of all the impossibilities? What do you think? I'll give an example or two just now. So these guys stood there. Behind them was a desert. In front of them was a land of promise, but full of giants and obstacles and difficulties, insurmountable, all of them. And you know what? That first city that I faced, it's interesting that that's the only, except for the next one, but that was for different reasons. It's a real battle that was described there in Joshua. Or in the most detail was the Jericho one, because that was the difficult town to take. It was like central between the south and the north, but it had these insurmountable high walls. You remember the story. So then God told him the stupid thing to walk around the city and sing songs. And then the thing collapsed and they took it without raising a weapon. So it's just like, so God shows them the biggest giant, you're just overcoming by singing in that regard. Other times you do something else, but it's listening. And then remember what he did to those guys. Next giant might be bigger. Remember the previous one. This one will be the same. David, what happened to him? God, when he was still a little boy in the sticks there on the hills, he looked after his 20 sheep or how many. And then a lion would come and it says in the Bible, he took him by his whiskers and he killed him. And you know what? Later on when he faced a proper giant, like a 10-foot giant, 12-foot Goliath, remember what he said to them? He said, you know what? When I was in the field, this and this happened. And it's going to be the same with you. The same. He remembered. He says, you know what? That lion, I cut his head off. I grabbed him. I was 14 when I did it. I grabbed him. I sliced him. And I'm going to do that with you now. Watch it. 10 seconds. So friends, how do you look at your giants today? Have you got a past that you remember? Have you got victories in your past? If you walk with God, you will have them. Because they were not there to destroy you. They were there to give you hope. God had not sent those giants or the lion and the bear on David's path to destroy him, but to encourage him. Now it sounds maybe blasé to say that because I've got my own giants that I'm terrified of. And some nights I don't sleep, and sometimes I don't sleep for 3 nights. Because But you know, God said to me the one night, He says, Wynand, do not let fear enter your heart. Remember. It's always remember. 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 That's the deal. So they had to remember all those things because they faced this impossible thing. And it's the same. What about us today, friends? Let's talk a little bit about this church. You guys come to this church. Some of you are new, so I don't know all of you. But there's lots of promises here. When it started, God gave a word. One of the words right in the beginning with Bruce and them still was in Jeremiah 29. It says that promise was, the context they were given, they were in captivity in Babylon. And God said to them, He says, I know the plans I have for you, not plans to destroy you, but to give you a hope and a future. So friends, whatever happens to us, it's not to destroy us. It's to give us a hope and a future. Now sometimes it just seems, it's a bizarre statement. But all I know is God doesn't lie. He doesn't lie. And He will do it. There's not a word in all of eternity that our God spoke that it's not happening. Not one. Everyone will be fulfilled. So, there were promises of good marriages. There were promises of health. There were promises of without debt. And let me tell you one or two stories for those that don't. And it's not a boast. It's just real. It's just it's God's testimony in this thing. I remember when we came here in 2002. However, the church was probably small, 150 to 120, 150 people. But in any case, we had debt in the church of 82,000 rand. Now, in those days, it was a bit of a mountain. It was more than. So I remember that beginning of the year, God said certain things to me and so on. And I said in the beginning of the year, because I felt God said to me, the debt will be paid off in 6 months. But you don't have to. You can't say one word about it except the first day. And that's all I did. You can, for those that were here, you might remember it. I said, this is the debt of the church. And the Lord told me a certain weekend in June, I can't remember, let's say it was the 10th of June, the debt will be paid off. But you don't have to never mention it again. The 10th, that previous day, look on bank statement, gone. Stood up and said, guys, remember 6 months ago? That's it. Later on, he told us to build this building, which was like stupid, maybe. Many people thought we were crazy. But he said it, and we did it, and we had no debt. It was paid by the day. 12 months, everything that you see here, not a cent debt ever. And we took 2 offerings that was probably, let me see, it was not even 2% of what the building cost. 2 offerings. And yet it stands. Never begged people for money because the Lord gave us a promise. But you see, friends, it is when you face a giant, and God will always speak to you before you face something. Maybe you didn't hear Him, but He did speak. I know of myself, and then I step back a little bit and I shake my head and wake up a bit, but then God speaks all the time. And then there's the giant, and then there's the remembrance, which is encouragement to just push us over the wall. And sometimes you wait 20 years for it. But it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Most people wait long time because there's a bit of a preparation and all that. So God did that thing. I remember, you will remember, we did that play, Heaven's Gates and Hell's Earth. Who were here in those days? Who saw that play? So there's some of you that saw it. So now for me it was, I remember the previous year, 2007 in August. Now I'm telling this to encourage you today. I felt God said to me very clearly, do this play in the church. So I think fast, and I always want to do things like in my own timelines and so on. So I did this, and I said, okay, we're going to do it the first week in November. We set it up. And then, but I didn't ask God, or I didn't listen, whatever. And then He said to me, no, the 1st of November will not work. You need to do it the first week in February, the next year. And I didn't argue with Him, but then a month later, I got the bad news that I had to get a big back operation in the middle of October, which would incapacitate me for that. Not that I had to be here, but God had his reasons. So now we come and we do this thing, and we tried everything, and we were a small little church. We didn't even have enough people to have 2 sets of players in this thing. So we had these chairs. We've got 750 of them. If you count 750 of them. So we were a small 150 people in the church, maybe 180 or so, I can't remember. So we put all the chairs out because we had a fearful expectation that we might get 300 people. So I remember the morning we had our normal service. We started that Sunday night, and I didn't go home. I was too terrified because I faced this. Maybe we're just going to make fools of ourselves now. So I walked in the garden this whole afternoon and just say, Lord, please, just 300 people, please. Then I'm fighting this thing. God gave, just said, do this thing, I'm going to bless the city. That's what he said. So we get here. So we come in the afternoon, and we had a prayer meeting there in that back kids' room there. So, friends, when I walked into that room, the presence of God was so tangible, it was hot. I couldn't stand on my feet. Now, the play was going to start at 7 o'clock, so we had a prayer meeting 4:45 to 6, or 4:45, 4:45 to 6:45. We had a prayer meeting for an hour there. When I got in here, there was nobody. Going to the prayer meeting there, it was like this incredible thing that happened there. And when I walked out there, and we came into this hall, there was not one open seat. You see, because God made a promise. Instead of our unbelief and fearfulness and junk, God will stay faithful. Doesn't matter what you do, He will stay faithful because He said something. So now, it was a disaster in a positive sense, extreme. I mean, the end of the thing, I stood up here, and we wanted to make an altar call. But now, and I said to the people, so, who wants to make their lives right with God? And that whole bunch of people ran forward. We had like this fancy little follow-up team here and everything, and they were just overwhelmed in 2 seconds. Kadwa. Game over. So now, next day, we like rattled. We don't know what to do. So I said, okay, we need 150 more chairs. So we went in town, got 150, put them in here, 900 chairs. Next night, same thing. Went back next day, need more chairs. So we packed them out in the galleries there. You couldn't get in that third night. That third night, people were bussing in from other cities. They took that wall out on this side and broke through to get in here. The queue was to the mall here. In the end, we locked that door with chains to keep people out. Why? Not because we're a fancy church, but God gave us a promise against insurmountable odds. Who's going to come to this church in the bush? So friends, what is God saying to you? God spoke to us about health. I mean, now it's not anything, but in the 12 years that we're in this church, we had one funeral. We had one funeral and one divorce. That's not, I don't know if it's a lot or little, but God did incredible things. We had in that year, in that time, no one in this church died of cancer. Everybody that contracted cancer in this church was healed. Lindeque, she's still alive. And I'm saying this not to boast, but to show you how faithful God is because He made us a promise. So a covenant that He calls us to walk in today is rooted in the past. It's rooted in the past so that we can hold on and roll it over into our next battle and roll it over and roll it over. And remember and face. Remember and face. And that's how God works. And otherwise, we forget. We get fearful and we ran to the safe land. That's what happens. He will give you far more than what you expect. So what's your expectation? What's the expectation? Maybe you guys must next week put another 50 chairs out, just in case. This morning I felt it there. I said, so I wonder why we only have 50 chairs out. What's our expectation here? What's your expectation? And if you doubt, do more. Because, no one's going to moan if there's one open seat. It's not a rebuke. It's just, what do you expect of God? Can I just read you one little verse? Remember, God's in you, and this one thing about God is nothing is impossible for you. So nothing is impossible for you. He lives in you. The Father, friends, lives in you as He lived in Jesus. It says that. John 14. That's the same. It's the same. He's as much in me as He is in Jesus. That's the thing. He says, in that day you will know that. Verse 20. Here in Ephesians, I'm reading from it's a very nice translation. This is the Passion Translation. I don't know if you know it. Verse 20 is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Ephesians 3, verse 20. Never doubt God's mighty power to work in you and accomplish all this. Friends, never doubt God's presence in you, His power. It says in the previous verse there, His explosive power. You see that explosion. See that rock in the desert, 4 million people plus all the cattle and skaap and bok and beeste and whatever. See that rock explode with a river. Or what do you see? He will achieve infinitely more than your greatest request. See, your most unbelievable dream, infinitely more, friends. I like to study galaxies. They're big. They're very big. And exceed your wildest imagination. Friends, when we did that 3-4 days of heaven's gates and hell's flames, I tell you, my mind was blown infinitely more than what all of us in this church expected. And you speak to the people that were here. I mean, we were blown. I couldn't speak for 2 weeks. It's just, that's God. And that was in the face. We had lots of other persecution that some people might not know of. But in the midst of God said to me, I'm going to break open something. After that, so many things happened. Not for us, but for everybody. I mean, people, they bust from Lichtenburg. How did they know? We don't have people here. They bust in, they were like 10 buses outside here with people. Next day, a dominee from there phoned me, his son, that they had a fight with, they haven't spoken to each other for years. He came here, God saved him, and they had a reconciliation 2 o'clock that one morning. That dominee phones me, says, that's God, friends. Listen to this. He will outdo them all, for His miraculous power constantly energizes you. As you sit here, friends, the same power that created the universe out of, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is in you. It's in you. That same power is in you. In its fullest measure, as it was when Jesus was ripped out of that grave onto the highest throne in heaven, that same power. The Bible says that, friends. But our problem is we're just too dumb to believe it. It's true. It's true. That's who He is. Nothing is impossible for Him. Nothing. I mean, that one guy that had cancer, his name was Barry, still alive. He was right at it. He had lymph node cancer. We had a prayer meeting that Wednesday night, and we prayed. Afterwards, I said to Steve Spoon, remember him? Steve, I said, Steve, let's go and pray for Barry tomorrow in the church. In the hospital. He was lying here in, there's one in town here, not the other one, Pegleray. He was in Pegleray. So Pegleray. So we go in this atmosphere of death. So I was so discouraged. I don't know what to do. This room was so full of the giants of death and despair and everything. And this guy was like moaning, he's going to die in 2 days. And the doctors, so I didn't have the courage to even talk to him, never mind pray. But God said the previous time, pray for this boy. So I said to Steve, let's go. I'm not going to pray. This guy's going to die. So he said, the guy says, Wynand, please just pray for me. So we just went to him, we put hands on him, and we says, Lord, please heal Barry. I mean, we just normal, I didn't feel anything, I didn't make a back summy, nothing. So we went back. There was another girl here in church, Audrey, she was an ICU sister there in Netcare Hospital, there, the other one there in Klabani, that groot hospital, what's his name? Ferncrest. I forgot all these things, I can't remember. So they took a MRI scan, we had the scan. That guy from head to toe was full of little white spots of cancer, from there to here. And they took him straight into the ICU. So now, Audrey stands there. She's an ICU sister. So they bring Barry in, they put him under, and they cut him open. And guess what's inside? Zip. Instantly. Friends, it was so miraculous. The other ops that he had, the marks disappeared. Because this is true. Now, I know there are people here that have lost people of cancer and heart attacks and all these things. I'm not making fun of it in any way. I want to encourage you because God's here. Wants to propel you forward. He wants to show you your mud is actually a trampoline. He wants to say, go to the land that I've shown you. And in that land, I'm going to bless you. Maybe you sit with sickness. We'll pray for people like that now. But don't doubt him. Remember his words. Look at history. Because if you don't want to look back at that, you'll never walk in covenant with God. Because then you'll think you have achieved it. That's why I said to him, he says, if you go into that land that flows with milk and honey, don't, after 5 years when you've started your business and you're a millionaire, don't think you did it by yourself. Because I give you the ability to create wealth. I think it's chapter 8 of Deuteronomy somewhere, 18, around about there. This is me. It's a gift. And if you don't remember, you step out of covenant, you become this blunt person that forgot your past. You forgot how you suffered in the beginning. You forgot the journey. You forgot God's miracles. And you want to safeguard yourself so that you don't have memories or joys or dreams or hopes or anything left. You just become this robot because everything works. I'm settled forever. That's not the life of God. The life of God is filled with promise in the midst of giants so that we can keep in covenant, rooted in history, and our testimony builds up to the finale, all of it. I mean, that Wednesday night, friends, that last night of that thing, the hall was so full that you could physically not move. It was packed. It was probably 1,500 people in here. And when we did an altar call, all that happened, the people did this, the whole building, because that's how far you could move. The people that were here, they will give the testimony here. There was a guy up there that laughed at this thing the whole week. He says, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true. So he went that Wednesday morning, and he said to God, if this is true, let this whole wall stand up and move forward when they do a call. So he stood there, and when we opened, I was standing in front here. Well, that whole wall, and that guy got rocked almost off that thing. God touched him. Pops. You see, because he makes a promise, friends. And in the face of impossibilities, he will do it for me, for you, for all of us. So my encouragement is one more verse, and then we'll pray a little bit for one or two people. I just want to show you how God, what he wants to do. There's some more things here, but it's okay. No, it's friends, you know what? In Christianity, we are quite at ease with Jesus because he's the one that was here on earth. He died on a cross. There's all the pictures about him. They make movies. We see this whole thing. But But you know, the church has got it right to speak of the Father as this guy that's waiting on a throne for us, a judgment throne, and it's like you can't approach him, and you know, there's all these verses and so on. But I just want to say to you, he's not like that. He's a dad that will go and get you out of mud. He's not, you don't have to be scared of him. He's the one that wants to receive you in his arms. He wants you to go and sit on his lap, and he'll bump you a bit. And he'll do what he wants to do. Because he's far more than what you can imagine. He's far more lovable. He is beyond your wildest dreams. Our dad in heaven. Don't picture him as this cruel person. I'm not saying people do, but generally people are afraid of God. You don't have to be afraid of the Father in heaven. He's your dad. That's why Jesus says he's Abba, Dad. It's my dad. And get to know him. You know, we're familiar with Jesus. And I'm not making Jesus less because they're equal. But get to know the Father. You know, Jesus is incredible. But you know, part of why Jesus came to die on a cross for us. But he also came to show us the Father. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He's like me. Where's my glasses? Yeah. He came to show us the Father. He came to show us what life should look like. You know, friends, what's the meaning of prophecy in the Bible? Prophecy is always, it's not future telling. Sometimes it's part of it, you know, God gives a little bit of a warning, but it's generally never that. Prophecy, if you look at Moses, is a big prophet in the Old Testament, but what those big prophets did, they, in the midst of a bad situation, the prophetic was how to live as an alternative people in that place. That's what it is. And today, we sit with COVID. We sit with a world that's falling apart. We sit with climate disasters. We sit with all sorts of funny world rulers. But God calls us as a group of people, you and your wife and your husband and your kids and your grandparents and whoever, He calls us to live alternative in the midst of that. It's not going to rescue us out here. It's going to say, rise up as an alternative community. That's what the Deuteronomy is one sermon of all these chapters, 54 chapters, one sermon. And it's an articulation of faith and in the midst of complete impossibilities. He encourages us from verse 1 to the last verse in the face of insurmountable odds. My horlosie praat met my. Listen to this, friends. That is how God, He makes His promises. He says, advance. And that is His dream to happen over you this morning and tomorrow and next week and the rest of your life. Listen to this. Verse 13, He speaks of Joseph. He says, may the Lord bless VantagePoint with the precious dew from heaven above, and with the deep waters that lie below, with the best the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield, with the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains, and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills, with the best gifts of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of Him who dwelt in the burning bush. Let all these rest on the heads of VantagePoint. On the brow of the prince amongst his brothers. That's what He wants to do for you. Don't believe something else. Don't believe something else. God wants to give each one of you immeasurably more than what you can ask or imagine or dream. He wants to bless you with the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains, of all the wealth, of all the riches. Don't measure the world on the economic disaster, because you know why there's economic disaster on this planet? Guess why? Because people don't want to listen to God. There's this perfect economic model in Deuteronomy. Perfect. You know, I walk there where I live next to the Thames River. Every morning I go and walk 8 miles there, 5 miles. Walk. And then I look at those trees, I tell you, I've got millions and millions of leaves. But then I say to the Lord, you know what? There's so many leaves. It's too much. He says, yeah, there's too much leaves. Too many much. What do you say? When the wind blows, there's too much wind. There's such an abundance on this planet, friends. You see, because that's what he says there. The immeasurable wealth underneath, in the water, in the rivers, in the mountains, that's what it is. Why should it be different in our personal lives? I mean, that tree is here today, tomorrow it's gone. But look at that. Those trees, year in, year out, 1,000,000-fold fruit every year. That's the abundance of our God. And what does He want to do? He wants to bless us. To be in covenant, not to own it, but so that we can bless the world. So what can we do, friends? What can you group do here to bless the city? Think of something. Make up baskets and go to all the new, we did it 15 years ago. Go and give little food parcels out every night. Go and do something. Sow something. Do something. Find something to do. Come up with creative things. Advance. The Bible doesn't say, come and track a law. Go and advance. Advance. That mud is a springboard. Go. There's an inheritance in the city, big inheritance. I want to drive. If it's about filling this building, maybe it's that. But it's not to fill the building, it's to do something else. What's your expectation? What's your hope? What's your dream? Go into the land that I've given you. But God says, go in. Don't sit. Go in. Advance. Remember the past. Take courage. Amen. I don't want to start over.